What's up, guys? It's Reynad here, once again with a progressively worse haircut, another update for the Bazaar. So today we're going to go over a pretty big change we made to the game and kind of the reasoning and thought process that led us to that point. So when we last left off, we had a pretty simple game board like this one. We had two players, they each had a board where they put their stuff, and players would basically take turns buying items from the middle row, adding them to their board, and then they would use these items to do stuff. Now, the most common thing that these items would do is attack. It was a pretty common effect. A lot of the items in our game are weapons, and they're in the game for the purpose of hitting the other guy's stuff. So if this was, let's say, like a little sword, and it attacked for 2 damage every time you used it, once per turn you could attack this thing, and then the big item would go from 10 durability down to 8. And if it went to 0, it would die. This is more or less how the game worked. So we ended up having a game with a bunch of these items, a lot of which were weapons, and these weapons could attack anything they wanted. And the issue with this was focus firing.
Focus fire is when they use a bunch of their weapons to attack one target.
And this would happen every game. This was the play pattern for all players, regardless of what class or strategy they were playing. They would buy things that could control the board, like weapons, and then use them to focus fire the best piece of the opponent's strategy. This was very frustrating for a number of reasons. It made the snowballing problem much worse because the player who got the board lead first, or the one that could do the most damage and start destroying the opponent's stuff, they would just run away with the game every time. They would just start blowing everything up step by step. And there was no way the player who's behind could come back.
It didn't feel like you got to pick what you played with. It felt like the opponent got to pick what you played with. And all the cool multi-item synergy strategies would get holes poked in them. So you only ever wanted to buy the items that were independently strong. This was a huge problem for our game because you couldn't really make a cool strategy. All the items operated independently. You could make a tier list for our game and it would give you the right answer almost every turn.
It became pretty obvious that it was a very dangerous thing to give our players too much control over their opponent's board. We basically only had 2 solutions for this. Either we could nerf the offense in our game or add more defensive mechanics. For example, one of the first solutions we tried is making all the weapons just fire straight across to the thing that is in front of them. And this might solve the focus firing problem. So let's say the board has 10 slots, and a small item would take 1 slot. A medium item would take 2 slots. A large item would take 3 slots. And when we thought about making the game in such a way where the weapons shot straight across from them, the way that it would have worked is basically this large item, which is 3 slots wide, would shoot at the 3 slots across from it. So all 3 of those slots would take that damage. And pretty much all of these mechanics that are positioning based kind of work with this slot based system.
With this change, players couldn't freely aim their weapons anymore. And it prevented focus fire because only 1 or 2 weapons would ever hit any specific item on a turn. We didn't like the solution that much though, because we felt like it took a lot of agency away from the player. They didn't have nearly as much control of what was happening in the game. There was a lot less potential for them to feel like they made a cool play when all the weapons were aiming themselves.
So in general, even though our weapons were too strong, they felt really good to use. You could click on them, you could aim anywhere you want, you felt like you had a lot of control over it. It was really satisfying to attack stuff. So we didn't really want to compromise on that at all if we could avoid it. So if we didn't want to nerf the offensive weapons, we had to look into defensive mechanics to solve this focus firing problem.
Other games promote building a strategy by restricting which resources the opponent can destroy. In Hearthstone, this is your hand of cards. In auto battler games, you can't really destroy anything the opponent has permanently.
The next solution we talked about was hidden slots. So basically, your character would have a slot here, and you could put your items directly there when you buy them. And these items could just never be targeted, they're hidden. With this, players would always have some piece of their strategy that wouldn't be destroyed. And this solution didn't feel quite right either because it was too non-interactive. It's kind of like lowering the net agency, right? If my opponent has two things that I can just never interact with, we have an inherently less interactive game, and I feel like I have less control over what happens. So we wanted people to be able to interact with all parts of the opponent's strategy. We just didn't want to make it as easy as it was in the current build.
Finally, we came up with an idea that we actually liked as a primary defensive mechanic. We divided our game board into 2 different rows. With 2 rows, the items in the front row would have to be dealt with before you can hit anything in the back row. So the front row items protect the back row.
So if I wanted to protect some sort of fragile item like, I don't know, a snow globe, instead of putting it up front where it would get attacked right away, I could just position this in the back row when I buy it. And my opponent has to get through, this is a shield. My opponent has to get through all this stuff in the front before they can attack the stuff in the back. We thought this was pretty elegant because it wasn't too different from how the game already played.
This solution seemed to check all the boxes we were looking for in a pretty elegant way. It made it so you couldn't selectively remove all of the important items from the opponent's board. We think it's a pretty intuitive mechanic because the frontline items are literally in front of the back row, so you have to get through them in order to hit the back row. And the thing we liked most about this solution was that players still got to freely aim their weapons and feel like they had control over how they used them.
We didn't just think this solution was an elegant way to stop the focus fire problem that we had. We also liked it because it just introduced a lot of this design space accidentally, and a lot of it was pretty intuitive.
For the first time in our game, an item that had no text and just 40 health was suddenly very interesting as a card.
Because you could just place like a big rock or something in front here, and it would tank a ton of damage and protect your backline items before your opponent could get to them. So like every item could fill the function of tanking, and mechanics like long range were really intuitive because as soon as you read it, like you know exactly how long range works. So yeah, this row system seemed to check all the boxes, and we were pretty excited because it felt like one of the last big changes we had to make for everything to fall into place. I hope you guys like this update, and make sure you let us know what you think, whether it's here in YouTube comments, on Reddit, on Twitter. It's Play the Bazaar on everything. Speaking of which, playthebazaar.com is where you can pre-order right now. And look, I know it's a free-to-play cross-platform game. Like, what's the point of pre-ordering? We will be adding certain value propositions and cosmetics and things like that for people that do it. But playthebazaar.com, if you do pre-order, main benefit, you get into the beta whenever that's ready. Don't have a launch date yet, and I will not give you one because we're just gonna miss it and you're gonna get pissed. But it does legitimately help the game for those of you guys that do want to pre-order. Show some love for the project, and yeah. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Friday. Back in the Bazaar.